Vacancy by Janson Davies. Chapter 1. The Sleepless Threshold. Leslie Sterling had never believed in the supernatural. Her world was built on logic, deadlines, and caffeine, the sacred trinity of college survival. But on the eve of her final exam in advanced cognitive psychology, logic failed her. Her brain, bloated with flashcards and lecture notes, refused to sleep. She lay in her dorm room, eyes wide open, heart thudding like a metronome set too fast. She tried everything: herbal tea, counting backward from 100, even replaying her professor's droning lectures in her mind. Nothing worked, so she turned to something she'd read once in a wellness blog: meditation. Not the spiritual kind, just breathing and visualizing. She imagined herself somewhere else, somewhere quiet, somewhere useful. She pictured the exam room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Desks stood in neat rows like soldiers awaiting orders. And there, at the front, was Professor Halberd, an aging narcissist with a penchant for inappropriate compliments and pop quizzes. He was hunched over a stack of papers, scribbling furiously. Leslie floated above him. She didn't walk into the room. She didn't open a door. She simply was, weightless, invisible, watching. Halberd muttered to himself, flipping pages, crossing out questions, adding new ones. Leslie drifted closer, peering over his shoulder. Her heart should have been racing, but it wasn't. She felt calm, detached, like a camera lens zooming in on a scene. She read every question. Some were familiar, others were obscure. Details from footnotes, tangents he'd mentioned once and never revisited. She memorized them all. Then, like a rubber band snapping, she was back. Her alarm clock blared. Her body jolted upright, drenched in sweat. The room was the same, but she wasn't. She sat there, stunned, trying to decide whether she'd dreamed it, hallucinated it, imagined it. But when she walked into the exam room hours later, everything was exactly as she'd seen. The questions, the layout, even Halberd's coffee stain on the corner of the desk. She knew every answer. Was it cheating? She didn't know, didn't care. Halberd had tested them on material he never taught. If anything, she'd leveled the playing field. That night, Leslie didn't sleep again. She meditated, and this time she chose where to go. Chapter 2. The Ethics of Air. Leslie sat cross-legged on her dorm bed, the exam paper folded neatly beside her like a relic. She hadn't just passed, she'd aced it. Every obscure question, every trick phrasing had landed like a feather on her tongue. She hadn't even needed to think. The answers had arrived fully formed, as if whispered by the room itself. But now, in the hush of post-exam silence, a question lingered louder than any she'd answered. Was it cheating? She turned the idea over like a coin, examining both sides. On one hand, she hadn't broken any rules. She hadn't stolen a copy of the test, hadn't hacked into a database. She'd simply seen it, from above, from elsewhere. But the other side of the coin was heavier. She hadn't earned that knowledge through study. She'd bypassed the struggle. And wasn't struggle the point? She remembered Halberd's smirk as he handed back the exams. "Sterling," he'd said, "either you've got a photographic memory, or you've finally learned how to listen." His voice had dripped with condescension, but beneath it was something else: unease. He knew he hadn't taught half of what he'd tested. He knew she shouldn't have known. Leslie didn't respond. She just smiled, folded the paper, and walked away. That night, she sat in the dark, the room lit only by the glow of her desk lamp. She meditated again, not to escape, but to understand. She visualized the classroom, the professor, the questions. Then she visualized herself watching, floating, observing. It hadn't felt wrong then. It didn't feel wrong now. It felt natural, like breathing. She began to wonder if knowledge could be accessed without effort, without pain. What did that mean for the systems built around it? Exams, grades, gatekeeping. Was she a thief or a pioneer? The air around her shimmered slightly, as if responding to her thoughts. She closed her eyes and let herself drift. Not to the classroom this time, but to the library. She hovered among the stacks, watching students cram, whisper, sleep. She saw a girl crying over a textbook, a boy scribbling formulas on his arm. She saw desperation, exhaustion, fear, and she felt none of it. She was air. She was thought. She was free. When she returned to her body, she felt a strange mix of guilt and exhilaration. She hadn't meant to become something else, but she had, and now the question wasn't whether it was cheating. It was whether she could stop. Chapter 3. Rooms with Resonance. Leslie began to notice something strange. Not all rooms were equal. Her dorm room, for instance, was functional but inert. It allowed her to drift, but only so far, like a docked boat nudging against its moorings. The library had more pull, especially near the philosophy section, where the air felt thick with questions no one had answered. But the real shift came when she crashed at her friend Marla's off-campus apartment. The moment she lay down on Marla's couch, something opened. It wasn't physical. It was like the room had a memory of its own, a residue of laughter, heartbreak, spilled wine, whispered secrets. Leslie closed her eyes and felt herself pulled outward, faster than before. She passed through the walls like mist, through the city like wind, and hovered above the ocean before snapping back. She gasped, heart racing. Marla snored softly in the next room, unaware. Leslie began to test her theory. She booked a night at a boutique hotel downtown. The room was pristine, sterile, designed for comfort but devoid of history. She tried to project. Nothing. She was stuck, like a signal lost in static. Then she tried a roadside motel. The carpet was threadbare, the wallpaper peeled like sunburned skin. The mirror was cracked, but the room hummed with stories, arguments, reconciliations, lonely nights, desperate prayers. Leslie lay on the bed and closed her eyes. She was gone. She drifted through the city, then the continent. She hovered over Paris, dipped into a cathedral in Spain, brushed the edge of the Nile, and swept past the pyramids. Each place felt like a whisper, a memory not her own. She returned breathless, trembling, exhilarated. Some rooms, she realized, were portals, not because of their design, but because of their emotional architecture. The more a room had been lived in, felt in, the more it could carry her. She began seeking them out. Hostels, attics, guest rooms. She stayed with friends, acquaintances, even strangers. She learned to read a room like a diary. The way the light fell, the dents in the furniture, the silence between sounds. She could feel grief in the floorboards, joy in the curtains, longing in the dust. Each room became a map, each journey a lesson. But with every trip, she felt the tether to her body stretch thinner. She began setting alarms, timers, safeguards. She ate more, slept less, kept water by the bed. She knew now that her body was not just a vessel, it was a lifeline. Still, she couldn't stop. The rooms were calling, and she was learning to listen. Chapter 4. The Great Wall and the Great Risk. Leslie had never been to China. She'd seen it in textbooks, documentaries, postcards pinned to Marla's corkboard. But one night, lying in a rented room above a laundromat, its walls humming with the scent of detergent and regret, she closed her eyes and reached farther than ever before. She passed through the city like a breath, through clouds like silk, through time zones like pages turning. And then she was there. The great wall stretched beneath her like a spine of stone, winding across the hills with ancient patience. The air was crisp, the stars unfamiliar. She hovered above the wall, watching tourists shuffle below, unaware of the phantom drifting overhead. She felt awe, and something else, fragility. She had never been this far. She tried to stay calm, to breathe, but something tugged at her. A thread, a warning. Her body was calling her back, faintly, like a voice underwater. She ignored it. She drifted farther, tracing the wall's serpentine path, dipping into nearby villages, listening to languages she didn't understand. She felt like a god, or a ghost. Then the thread snapped. She gasped. Her vision blurred. The world tilted. She felt herself falling, not physically but spiritually, like a kite cut loose. Panic surged. She tried to return, to retrace her steps, but the path was fogged. Her body was too far, too weak. She screamed without sound. And then, impact. She slammed back into herself like a meteor hitting Earth. Her eyes flew open. Her heart thundered. Her limbs were numb. Her mouth was dry. She couldn't move. Hours passed. Marla found her the next morning, curled on the bed, pale and shaking. "Leslie," she whispered, touching her shoulder. "Are you okay?" Leslie blinked. Her voice was a rasp. "Water." Marla brought her tea, soup, blankets. Leslie didn't explain. She couldn't. She just lay there, recovering, feeling the weight of her body like a prison and a gift. She had learned something vital. There were limits. Her soul could soar, but her body had needs: food, sleep, breath. She began to treat it with reverence, not annoyance. She ate more deliberately. She meditated with caution. She set timers not just to wake her, but to save her. Still, the hunger remained. Not for food, for distance. She wanted to go farther, to see more, to understand what lay beyond the edge of maps and memory. But now she knew the cost, and she was willing to pay it. Chapter 5, Room 6. It didn't look like much. A faded sign, a cracked parking lot, a row of doors painted the color of old pennies, the kind of place you pass without noticing unless you're desperate or drifting. Leslie was both. She arrived at dusk, her backpack heavy with notebooks and silence. The clerk didn't ask questions, just slid a key across the counter and pointed to room 6. The room was small, one bed, one lamp, one window that faced nothing in particular, but Leslie felt it immediately, the stillness, the way the air held its breath, the way the walls didn't press in, but waited. She unpacked slowly. A journal, a photograph of her mother, a stone she'd carried since childhood. She placed them on the nightstand like offerings. Then she lay down. She didn't leave the room for 3 days. She ate granola bars, drank tap water, slept in bursts. And each night she traveled. Not far, not yet. She hovered above the motel, watching the cars pass, the stars blink, the world turn. She drifted into nearby forests, listening to owls and wind. She visited a diner 2 towns over, watching a waitress refill coffee for a man who never looked up. She was careful now. She stayed tethered. She returned before the thread frayed. But something was changing. The room was changing. On the 4th night, the wallpaper shimmered, not visibly, but emotionally. It felt alive. The lamp hummed with a frequency she could almost hear. The bed cradled her like memory. She realized the room was listening. It wasn't haunted. It wasn't magical. It was attuned. To her, to the quiet rituals of her presence, to the way she breathed when she was afraid, to the way her soul stretched when she slept. She began to speak aloud, not to anyone, just to the room. She told it about her childhood, about the first time she left her body, about the fear of never coming back, about the hunger for something larger than herself. The room didn't respond, but it held her words like a vault. And each night she went farther. She visited the Colosseum, the Mariana Trench, a monastery carved into a cliff. She watched monks chant in languages older than empire. She drifted through coral reefs glowing with bioluminescence. She hovered above a desert where no one had walked in centuries. And always she returned. Room 6 became her axis, her sanctuary, her launch pad. She began to write again. Not just notes, not just observations, stories. Astral projection. Of people who traveled without moving, of rooms that remembered, of walls that whispered truths too quiet for speech. She wrote about a woman who could leave her body, but only when she was ready to forgive it. She wasn't sure if it was fiction. She wasn't sure if anything was. Chapter 6. The Man Who Looked Up. It happened on a Tuesday. Leslie had drifted into the diner again, the one 2 towns over, with the cracked vinyl booths and the waitress who moved like a song half-remembered. She hovered near the ceiling, watching the usual rhythms. Coffee poured, orders scribbled, lives unfolding in quiet loops. She was invisible, untouchable, weightless, until he looked up, a man in a gray coat, middle-aged, weathered. He sat alone, stirring his tea without drinking it. His eyes were tired but not dull. They held something else, something like knowing. He looked up, directly at her. Leslie froze. It wasn't possible. She wasn't visible. She wasn't even here, not really. But his gaze didn't waver. It met hers like a handshake, like a door opening. She fled. Back to room 6, back to breath and bone. She woke with her heart pounding, her skin electric. She sat up, trembling, staring at the lamp as if it could explain. The next night, she returned. He was there again, same booth, same tea. This time he spoke. "I thought you might come back." Leslie didn't respond. She hovered near the ceiling, unsure if she was dreaming or unraveling. "You're not the first," he said, sipping his tea, "but you're the first who stays." She descended slowly, cautiously, until she stood beside the booth. Not physically, but close enough to feel the heat of the tea, the weight of his words. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice a thought. He smiled. "Someone who used to travel? Someone who stopped?" "Why?" He looked out the window. "Because I lost the way back." Leslie felt the thread in her chest tighten. She thought of the night she almost didn't return. The silence, the falling. "I found a room," she said. He nodded. "Rooms are good. They remember." They sat in silence. The diner buzzed around them, oblivious. Leslie felt something shift, not in the world, but in herself. A door opening inward. "Can you still go?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not far, not like you." She wanted to ask more, about the cost, about the danger, about the loneliness. But he stood, left a tip, and walked out into the night. Leslie returned to room 6 and wrote for hours. She wrote about the man who looked up, about the way recognition feels like gravity, about how even ghosts need to be seen. She didn't know if she'd see him again. But she knew this. She wasn't alone. Chapter 7. The Thread Between. Leslie waited 3 nights before returning to the diner. She wasn't sure he'd be there. She wasn't sure she wanted him to be. But something in her had shifted, like a door cracked open, letting in wind and wonder. He was there, same booth, same tea, same quiet gravity. This time she sat across from him, not hovering, not hiding. She had practiced. She had learned how to shape herself into presence, how to fold her soul into a form that could be felt. He didn't flinch. "You're getting better," he said. She nodded. "I want to try something." He raised an eyebrow. "Dangerous words." "I want to take you with me." Silence. The diner faded around them. The hum of conversation became distant, like waves against a far shore. I haven't traveled in years, he said. Not since I lost someone. Leslie didn't ask who. She understood the shape of grief too well to pry. I think I can hold you, she said, if you trust me. He looked at her, not just at her face, but at the space around her, at the shimmer of possibility. Okay. They returned to room 6. He sat on the bed. She lit the lamp. The room felt different now, charged, expectant, like a stage before the curtain rises. Leslie lay beside him, closed her eyes, reached. She found the thread. It was thinner than hers, frayed, but it was there. She wrapped it gently with her own, braided them together with thought and breath. She whispered a word, not aloud, but into the space between them. Come. And they rose. Together. They hovered above the motel, two shadows stitched by intention. They drifted into the sky, past clouds and memory. Leslie held him with care, guiding, anchoring, listening. He gasped. She felt it, not as sound, but as vibration, awe, fear, joy. They visited a glacier, a temple, a city asleep beneath rain. He wept in silence, and she held him steady. Then she felt the thread strain. He was fading. She turned, wrapped him tighter, whispered again, "Stay." They returned. The room welcomed them like a hearth. He collapsed onto the bed, breathless, eyes wide. "I saw her," he said. Leslie didn't ask who. She just nodded. They sat in silence for hours. No words, just presence. And when he left, he touched her shoulder, not as a goodbye, but as a thank you. Leslie wrote that night, "There are threads between us, invisible, fragile, sacred. We think we travel alone. We never do." Chapter 8. The silence she kept. Word spread, not loudly, not publicly, but in whispers, in glances, in the way people lingered near room 6 as if it radiated something they couldn't name. The motel clerk began leaving her tea without asking. A woman in room 3 asked if Leslie could help her see her husband again. A boy with eyes too old for his age stared at her as if she were a doorway. Leslie said no, not cruelly, not coldly, but firmly. She didn't teach, she didn't explain, she didn't perform. It wasn't fear, it wasn't pride. It was something deeper, something like reverence. This gift, this ache, this ability to leave and return. It wasn't a skill, it wasn't a trick. It was a conversation between soul and silence, between body and beyond. To teach it would be to dissect it. To dissect it would be to kill it. She wrote instead. Stories, poems, fragments. She left them in drawers, under pillows, tucked into cracks in the wall. She didn't sign them. She didn't claim them. She let them be found like fossils, evidence of something ancient and alive. One story was about a woman who could walk through dreams but never speak in them. Another was about a man who built a staircase to the stars, one word at a time. People read them. People wondered. But Leslie remained quiet. One night, the boy with the old eyes knocked on her door. "I don't want to learn," he said. "I just want to know if it's real." Leslie looked at him, saw the hunger, saw the grief. She nodded. That was all. He smiled, not with joy, but with relief, as if the world had tilted slightly toward meaning. He never asked again. Leslie wrote that night, "Some truths are not meant to be taught. They are meant to be carried, like lanterns, like scars, like love." She traveled less often now, not because she couldn't, because she didn't need to. Room 6 had become a kind of body. The stories had become a kind of breath. The silence had become a kind of song, and she had become a kind of home. Chapter 9. The silence above. Silence. She had waited. Years, maybe, or days. Time had become elastic, stretched thin between moments of breath and wonder, but the hunger remained. Not for escape, for expansion. Leslie had seen cities, oceans, ruins. She had drifted through temples and trenches, through grief and grace. But she had never gone up. Not truly. That night she prepared. Room 6 was quiet, the lamp dimmed, the air held its breath. She lay down, wrapped herself in thought, and reached, not outward, but upward, past clouds, past satellites, past the hum of human invention. She passed the moon. It was colder than she expected, not in temperature, but in memory. It felt untouched, unheld, a place that had been looked at too often, but never truly seen. She drifted farther, past Mars, past the belt of broken stone, past the myths of gods and the math of men. She entered the void. It wasn't black, it wasn't empty, it was alive, with silence, with shimmer, with the pulse of distant suns. She felt herself stretch, thin as light, wide as longing. She saw a nebula. It looked like a wound, or a birth, or both. She wept, not from sadness, from scale, from the unbearable truth that she was small and sacred and seen. She felt something watching, a being, a mind, a presence, vast, patient, curious. Then there were many. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They knew her, and she knew them, aliens but filled with humanity. She hovered there, in communion, in surrender, in awe. She didn't ask questions. She didn't demand answers. She simply was. Then, return. Not sudden, not sharp. A slow folding, a gentle descent, like a leaf falling through time. She woke in room 6. Her body ached. Her breath was shallow. Her skin felt like paper. But her eyes held stars. She didn't write that night. She couldn't. There were no words, only silence. And the silence was enough. Chapter 10. The Ones Who Waited. She didn't mean to find them. She had returned to the void, not out of hunger, but out of longing. The kind that hums beneath the skin, the kind that feels like a question with no language. She drifted past the nebula again. It pulsed softly like a heart dreaming. She moved beyond it, into a region she hadn't touched before, a place where light bent strangely, where time felt folded. And then, they were there, not yet visible, not yet shaped, but present. She felt them before she saw them, a chorus of awareness, a constellation of minds. They didn't speak, they didn't move, they welcomed. Leslie hovered, uncertain. There were hundreds of them surrounding her astral body, trying to touch the body that wasn't there. Then one of them spoke to her. Not physically, emotionally, like a memory blooming. It reached toward her, not with limbs, but with pattern, a rhythm, a pulse, a question. She answered, not with words, with feeling, with the shape of her story, with the ache of her body and the shimmer of her travels. She offered herself, not as a specimen, but as a song. They all listened, and then they responded. She saw their world, a planet, a place, a field of thought, a garden of silence. She saw beings tending to memory like flowers. She saw structures made of intention. She saw children learning to shape gravity with kindness. She wept. They showed her more, their astral bodies exploring, a history of waiting, of watching, of wondering if anyone else had learned to travel without ships, to speak without sound, to reach without conquest. You are not the first, they said, not in words but in knowing. But you are the first to come gently. They had prophecies of a visitor like her, of a guide to another existence. Leslie felt herself unravel. Not in fear, in truth. She asked if they wanted her to stay. They said yes. But they warned her. To stay was to change. To stay was to shed the body, the name, the connection to who she was, to become something else, something vast, something quiet. She hesitated. She thought of room 6, of the man who looked up, of the boy with old eyes, of the stories tucked into drawers. She said no, not yet. They understood. They folded back into silence, into waiting, into the long patience of stars. Leslie returned. Room 6 was warm. The lamp flickered. The air smelled of dust and memory. She wrote that night. They wait. Not for conquest, not for worship, for recognition, for someone who arrives not to take but to listen. She slept deeply, and in her dreams the stars whispered her name. Final chapter, the room that remains. Leslie stayed, not in the stars, not in the void, not in the garden of alien minds. She stayed in room 6. The motel aged around her. The sign faded further. The clerk retired. New guests came and went, leaving behind echoes and crumbs of conversation. But the room remained. She traveled less, not because she couldn't, because she had seen enough. She had met silence. She had met presence. She had met beings who didn't need her to explain herself. And now she needed to be, not beyond, but within. She wrote stories that no one asked for, stories that didn't sell, stories that felt like breathing. She wrote about the boy who never asked again, about the man who saw her, about the nebula that pulsed like a wound, about the aliens who waited with kindness. She wrote about the thread, the one that connects us, not through blood or belief, but through the quiet act of witnessing. One day she left the room, not dramatically, not finally, just for a walk. She passed the diner, the forest, the edge of town. She felt the world hum beneath her feet. She felt her body as a gift, not a cage. She didn't return. The room remained. Someone else moved in, found a story tucked into the drawer, read it, felt something shift. And somewhere in a place beyond maps, a presence stirred. Not in longing, in recognition. We are not meant to escape the world. We are meant to touch it gently and let it touch us back. The end. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Also, please hit the bell icon for notifications.